All right, guys, chapter 9, the last chapter of The Great Gatsby. Um, there's some just really good stuff happening here. Nick says, after 2 years, I remember the rest of that day and the next night and the next day only as an endless drill of police and photographers and newspaper men in and out of Gatsby's front door. So he goes on just to talk about how utterly sad and his life, which he was filled with doing things and people, but not real friends. Most of those reports were a nightmare, grotesque, circumstantial, eager, and untrue. When Michaelis's testimony at the inquest brought to light Wilson's suspicion of his wife, I thought the whole tale would shortly be served up in racy pasquinade. But Catherine, who might have said anything, didn't say a word. She showed a surprising amount of character about it, too. So they didn't bring up all of the affair. She told him that her sister had never seen Gatsby, that her sister was completely happy with her husband, and her sister had been into no mischief whatsoever, which, again, not true, right? More lies happening here. But all this, but all of this part of it seemed remote and unessential. I found myself on Gatsby's side and alone. From the moment I telephoned news of the catastrophe to West Egg Village, every surmise about him, every practical question was referred to me. At first I was surprised and confused. Then as he lay in his house and didn't move or breathe or speak hour upon hour, it grew upon me that I was responsible because no one else was interested. Interested, I mean, with that intense personal interest to which everyone has some vague right to at the end. I called up Daisy half an hour after we found him, called her instinctively and without hesitation, but she and Tom had gone away early that afternoon. Had taken baggage with them, left no address. Say when they'd get back? No. Any idea where they are? How could I reach them? I don't know, can't say. I wanted to get somebody for him. I wanted to go into a room where he lay and reassure him, I'll get somebody for you, Gatsby. Don't worry, just trust me, I'll get somebody for you. He finally gets a hold of Meyer Wilsheim, and yeah, nobody. So it says, let's see. Someone started to ask me questions, but I broke away and going upstairs looked hastily through the unlocked parts of his desk. He'd never told me definitely that his parents were dead, but there was nothing, only the picture of Dan Cody, a token of forgotten violence, staring down from the wall. Let's see, I was sure he'd start when he saw the newspaper, just as sure as there'd be a wire from Daisy before noon, but neither a wire nor Mr. Wolfsheim arrived. No one arrived, except more police and photographers and newspapermen. He's completely alone. Only Nick is there. And then he gets this note from Wolfsheim, right? Dear Mr. Carraway, this has been one of the most terrible shocks of my life to me. I hardly can believe that it is true at all. Such a mad act as that man did should make us all think. I cannot come down now, as I am tied up in some very important business and cannot get mixed up in this thing now. Notice the language. If there's anything I can do a little later, let me know in a letter by Edgar. I hardly know where I am when I hear about a thing like this, and am completely knocked down and out. Yours truly, Meyer Wolfsheim. And then he hastily addenda beneath. Let me know about the funeral, etc. Do not know his family at all. He thought maybe Daisy would be calling, but no, it was someone else. Young Park's in trouble, so we find out, there's somebody working for Gatsby that's in Mr. Trouble. Hello, I interrupted breathlessly. Look here, this isn't Mr. Gatsby. Mr. Gatsby is dead. Then a quick squawk as the connection was broken. I think it was on the third day that a telegram signed Henry C. Gatz arrived from town in Minnesota. It said that the sender was leaving immediately and postponed the funeral until he came. It was Gatsby's father. And he ended up being a very solemn old man, helpless, dismayed, bundled in a long, cheap ulster against the warm September day. His eyes leaped continuously with excitement, and when I took a bag and the umbrella from his hands, he began to pull so incessantly in his sparse gray beard that I had difficulty in getting off his coat. So this is where Gatsby's come from. He said he saw it in the Chicago newspaper, and then he asked, about it. He must have been madman that killed him, and so forth. Where have they got Jimmy? Isn't that interesting? James, Jimmy. Such a different story than the one that we've read. After a little while, Mr. Gatz opened the door and came out, his mouth ajar, his face flushed. He had reached an age where death no longer has the quality of ghastly surprise, and when he looked around him now for the first time and saw the height and splendor of the hall and the great rooms, mixed with an odd pride, right? So he has grief, but an odd pride. Gats is his name, not Mr. Gatsby, right? We were close friends, Nick says. Let's see. The Clip Springer is there. So the only people at the funeral end up being and oh, look how sad this is. So this is a conversation, right? I've been calling up a few people myself. They were hard to find. The funeral's tomorrow. Da, da, da. Oh, I will, he wrote hastily. Of course, I'm not likely to see anybody. Of course, you'll be there yourself. Well, I'll certainly try. What I called them about is, wait a minute, how about saying you'll come? Well, the fact is, the truth of the matter is that I'm staying with some people up here in Greenwich, and they are rather expecting me to be with them tomorrow. In fact, there's a sort of picnic or something. Of course, I'll do my very best to get away, so even he won't come. After that, I felt a certain shame for Gatsby. One gentleman to whom I telephoned implied that he had got what he deserved. So again, nobody's in. Can't get anybody back. I mentioned Gatsby. Oh, well, will you what was his name? What was your name? Wolfsheim doesn't come. Let's see. And then this is what Wolfsheim has to say. When a man gets killed, I never like to get mixed up in it in any way. I keep out, right? He doesn't want to be involved in this. But Mr. Gats has still some pride in his son, right? He says, Jimmy sent me this picture. It was a photograph of the house, cracked in the corners and dirty with many hands. He pointed to every detail. Look here, and then sought admiration from my eyes. He had shown it so often that I think it was more real to him now than the house itself, even though he's there in the house. Jimmy sent it to me. I think it's a very pretty picture. It shows up well, very well. Had you seen him lately? He come out to see me 2 years ago and bought me the house I live in now. Of course, we was broke up when he run off from home, so I see now there was a reason for it. So again, the family. And even looking at the way that his father speaks, right? Of course, we was broke up, and things like that. It really shows the class that he came from. So in Hopalong Cassidy, the book, we find in the back cover this self-improvement plans. We have this schedule right here, right, which is pretty rigorous, actually, when you look at it. He's getting some exercise in, he's studying electricity, etc., working, and then baseball, sports, elocution, poise, how to attain it, needed inventions, really trying to make sure that he's got a place in this world. And then the things that he thinks are important: no more wasting time at chapters, no more smoking or chewing, bathe every other day, read one improving book, save $5, $3 per week, be better to parents. So this is all his plan to be better, right? And the thing is, I think he did it, but he was really, really trying to become a better person. And his dad says Jimmy was bound to get ahead. He always had some resolve like this or another. Do you notice what he's got about improving his mind? He was always great for that. Now, we get the Lutheran minister comes, right? And Gatsby's father. The minister glanced several times at his watch, so I took him aside and asked him to wait for half an hour. But it wasn't any use. Nobody came. He didn't have any true friends, you guys. What an empty life, right? At 5 o'clock, our procession of 3 cars reached the cemetery and stopped in a thick drizzle beside the gate. First a motor hearse, horribly black and wet, then Mr. Gats and the minister and I in the limousine, and a little later, 4 or 5 servants and the postman from West Egg and Gatsby station wagon, all wet to the skin. And so, oh look, one more person, one other guest. I looked around. It was the man with owl-eyed glasses whom I'd found marveling over Gatsby's books in the library one night 3 months before. So only these 3, his father, Nick, and Owl Eyes, made it to the funeral. Let's see. I tried to think about Gatsby then for a moment, but he was already too far away, and I could only remember, without resentment, that Daisy hadn't sent a message or a flower. Nothing. Now they continue. And this is all he has to say, all Owl Eyes has to say about poor Gatsby. Let's see. this is what I want to really hit on here. He says, I see now that this has been a story of the West. After all, Tom and Gatsby, Daisy, Jordan, and I were all Westerners, and perhaps we possessed some deficiency in common, which made us subtly unadaptable to Eastern life. Even when the East excited me most, even when I was most keenly aware of its superiority to the bored, sprawling, swollen towns beyond the Ohio, with their interminable inquisitions, which spared only the children and the very old, even when it had always for me a quality of distortion. West Egg, especially, still figures in my more fantastic dreams, right? But no one knows the woman's name, and no one cares about all of these things. After Gatsby's death, the East was haunted for me like that, distorted beyond my eyes the power of correction. So when the blue smoke of brittle leaves was in the air and the wind blew the wet laundry stiff on the line, I decided to come back home. There was one thing to be done. Before I left, an awkward, unpleasant thing, and that perhaps had better have been let alone. But I wanted to leave things in order, to not just trust that obliging and indifferent sea to sweep my refuse away. I saw Jordan Baker, and talked over and around what had happened to us together and what had happened afterward to me, and she lay perfectly still, listening in a big chair. She was dressed to play golf, and I remember thinking she looked like a good illustration. So he cuts off ties, right? Let's see, what did she say here? I doubted that though there were several, she could have been married at a nod of her head, but I pretended to be surprised. Oh, this is when I finished, she told me without comment that she was engaged to another man. Huh. Nevertheless, you did throw me over, she said. You threw me over on the telephone. And I don't give a damn about you now, but it is a new experience for me, and I felt a little dizzy for a while. And he said, they talk about being a bad driver. He says, I'm 30. I'm 5 years too old to lie myself and call it honor. She didn't answer, angry and half in love with her, and tremendously sorry. I turned away. Then he sees Tom one day late in October. His hands a little out in front of his body. Just as I slowed up to avoid overtaking him, he stopped and began frowning into the windows of a jewelry store. Suddenly, he saw me and walked back, holding out his hand. What's the matter, Nick? Do you object to shaking hands with me? Yes. You know what I think of you? You're crazy, Nick. Crazy as hell. I don't know what's the matter with you, Tom. What did you say to Wilson that afternoon? He stared at me without a word, and I knew I had guessed right about those missing hours. I started to turn away, but he took a step after me and grabbed my arm. I told him the truth, he said. He came to the door while we were getting ready to leave, and when I sent down word that we weren't in, he tried to force his way upstairs. He was crazy enough to kill me if I hadn't told him who owned the car. His hand was on the revolver in his pocket every minute he was in the house. What if I did tell him? That fellow had it coming to him. He threw dust in your eyes just like he did in Daisy's, but he was a tough one. He ran over Myrtle like you'd run over a dog. There was nothing I could say except one unutterable fact. It wasn't true. And if you think I didn't have my share of suffering, look here. When I went to give that flat, I saw the damn box of dog biscuits sitting there on the sideboard and sat down and cried like a baby. I couldn't forgive him or like him, but I saw what we had done was, to him, entirely justified, what he had done. It was all very careless and confused. Now that's an important word, careless. They were careless people, Tom and Daisy. They smashed up things and creatures, then returned back into their money or their vast carelessness or whatever it was that kept them together and let other people clean up the mess they had made. What a true thing, right? Gatsby's house is empty. Most of the big shore places were closed now before the winter. Let's see. I became aware of the old island here that flowered once for Dutch sailors' eyes, a fresh green breast of the New World, its vanished trees. The trees that had made way for Gatsby's house had once pandered in whispers to the last and greatest of all human dreams. Now, here is the best, the takeaway. And as I sat there, brooding on the old unknown world, I thought of Gatsby's wonder when he first picked out the green light at the end of Daisy's dock. He had come a long way to this blue lawn, and his dream must have seemed so close that he could hardly fail to grasp it. He did not know that it was already behind him. Somewhere back in the vast obscurity beyond the city, where the dark fields and the Republic rolled on under the night, Gatsby believed in the green light, the orgastic future that year by year recedes before us. It eluded us then, but that's no matter. Tomorrow we will run faster, stretch out our arms farther, and one fine morning. So we beat on, boats against the current, borne back ceaselessly into the past. What a beautiful thing here, right? So Nick knows Gatsby could never have had what he was looking for because he wanted the past, right? The exact past. Now this, though, is beautiful. The orgastic future that year by year recedes before us. We try to do things and it eludes us, but we try, we run faster, we stretch out a little bit further. We beat on, boats against the current, borne back ceaselessly into the past, trying and trying and trying to get the future. All right, guys, so many things happening here. Sorry it wasn't as organized as I'd like for it to have been, but some really beautiful imagery here in Chapter 9 as we come to a close and wrap up the life of the great Gatsby. A couple of things I want you to be thinking about. The title of the book. Why call it The Great Gatsby? Why put so much significance in the green light? Why put so much significance in owl eyes and the fact that he was there the first time Nick met Gatsby and then the last? Why spend time seeing Tom again? Why close up things with Jordan? And why was no one there at Gatsby's funeral other than Nick, his father, and Owl Eyes? And what has this experience taught Nick about life? If we go back just really quickly into Chapter 1, sorry, it's going to take just a quick minute. And it's not there. So, but in Chapter 1, we read about the fact that he lets Gatsby slide out of his bad feelings. And I wonder if it would have been different if Gatsby hadn't died. How would Nick have felt about him then? All right, guys, also focus in on this. Think about these things. They will be important as we are finishing up this book. And I hope that you have enjoyed it.